It started with a single, frantic call for help, cut off so suddenly that the dispatcher swore she heard someone gasp before the line went dead. No one knew it then, but that unfinished sentence marked the beginning of a mystery that still haunts an entire community. Ava Clarke had always seemed destined for the stage. At 23, she had moved to Los Angeles with nothing but 2 suitcases, a stack of headshots, and a stubborn belief that her break would eventually come. She lived in a small, sun-bleached apartment near Culver City, the kind of place where neighbors kept to themselves and late-night sirens were a normal lullaby. But Ava didn't mind the noise or the crowded streets. She loved the idea of belonging to a world full of dreamers just like her. Her parents, Mark and Ellen Clarke, still lived in Portland and called her almost every evening. They worried constantly, about the long hours, the casting rejections, the unstable paychecks, but Ava reassured them with her usual bright optimism. She worked part-time as a barista, spent weekends rehearsing scenes with friends, and filled her nights with auditions, community theater, and long entries in her journal about the moment everything will finally click. She wasn't a star yet, but she was close. Everyone said so. Ava had recently filmed a small role in an indie film, nothing major, but enough to give her confidence. Enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. She had also been reconnecting with an older acquaintance, a wealthy businessman named Richard Hale, who had taken an interest in her career. He was influential, well-known, and connected to several entertainment investors. She thought of him as a mentor, though their relationship was more complicated than she admitted to her family. Richard was 61, smooth-spoken, and difficult to read. He had made his money in real estate and high-risk investments, including a controversial development deal involving Ava's parents years earlier. The project had ended badly, cost overruns, lawsuits, and lost savings. Ava had never forgotten how deeply it affected her parents, though she didn't know the full story. She only knew Richard now presented himself as someone wanting to help her career, someone with money, influence, and endless resources. Her closest friends were uneasy about him. They thought the attention he gave Ava bordered on too personal, too intense. But she brushed off their concerns. Richard was polite, supportive, generous. And he treated her with a seriousness that made her feel seen. Still, there were moments, small ones, that unsettled her. A lingering glance. A comment about the people she spent time with. A question that sounded less like concern and more like monitoring. And then there was Claire Monroe. Claire worked closely with Richard, his assistant, his fixer, his gatekeeper. In her mid-40s, sharply dressed and always composed, Claire seemed to appear wherever Richard went. She rarely spoke to Ava directly, yet her eyes followed her with a cold, assessing calm. Ava didn't know it yet, but that look, the one she could never quite explain, was the first silent warning. On the night of the emergency call, Ava had been rehearsing lines for a new audition. She texted her mother around 10 p.m., promising she'd call in the morning. She sent a clip of her monologue to a friend. She washed her dishes, folded laundry, and lit a small candle on her bedside table, something she often did to relax. There was no sign of fear. No sign of danger. Nothing to suggest that within a few hours, neighbors would hear thuds and muffled cries through the apartment walls. Nothing to hint that her final moments would unfold in darkness, her home filled with gas, a candle flickering beside her bed. And nothing, absolutely nothing, to prepare anyone for what detectives would uncover once they stepped inside. The morning Ava Clarke's parents called the police, the Los Angeles sun was already heating the sidewalks, casting sharp shadows across the street outside her apartment. Ellen Clarke had grown anxious after Ava didn't answer her usual morning message, a simple, "Good morning, sweetheart," she sent every day. Ava always replied, even if just with a sleepy emoji or a rushed, running late. But that morning, there was nothing. By early afternoon, Ellen called again. Mark called twice. Texts went unread. Hours passed. The silence felt wrong, heavy, unnatural. Finally, Ellen dialed the LAPD non-emergency line, her voice trembling as she explained that her daughter lived alone, had made a frantic 911 call the night before, and now wasn't answering her phone. The operator pulled up the address. Their tone shifted. "Yes, ma'am. A call was made from that location at 12:37 a.m. The line disconnected. Ellen's heart dropped. Disconnected. Not hung up, cut off. Officers were dispatched immediately. When police arrived at Ava's apartment building, neighbors peeked through their blinds. A few of them already knew something had been wrong the night before. One resident, Mrs. Patel in 3B, had heard thudding noises around 1 a.m., not loud enough to sound like violence, but enough to wake her. She told her husband she thought someone had dropped a piece of furniture, but neither of them checked. Another neighbor swore he heard a muffled cry, but assumed it was someone arguing outside. No one realized those sounds were coming from Ava's home. Officers reached her door just before 4 p.m. They knocked. No answer. They called out her name. Still nothing. A faint smell seeped through the cracks, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Gas. The lead officer shouted for immediate backup, then forced the door open. What greeted them was a chilling blend of silence, stale air, and the unmistakable scent of danger. The apartment was filled with gas, thick enough to sting the eyes. A candle still burned on Ava's bedside table, its flame small but steady. It was a miracle the entire apartment hadn't erupted in flames. "Open windows, ventilate now," someone yelled. They rushed through the rooms, searching for the source of the gas leak. That was when the first officer saw her. Ava lay on the bedroom floor, motionless. She wasn't near the stove or the candle. She wasn't positioned in a way that suggested she had lost consciousness from fumes. Instead, her body bore signs of something far more sinister: bruises on her arms, a cut near her hairline, defensive wounds on her hands. The room told its own story. A toppled lamp. Bed sheets twisted and dragged. A mirror cracked at the edge. And on the hardwood floor, 2 tiny droplets of blood near Ava's wrist. One of the younger officers froze. This wasn't an accident. He didn't know yet how right he was. Detective Harper Lewis arrived 20 minutes later, stepping under the crime scene tape with a grim expression. He'd been with LAPD for almost 16 years and had seen more tragedies than he ever wished to admit, but something about this scene felt personal. The gas left on. The candles still burning. The faint, almost hidden signs of a struggle. It looked calculated. Like someone wanted the apartment to ignite, taking every clue, every fingerprint, every truth with it. Harper walked slowly through the bedroom, studying everything, absorbing the silence that clung to the air. Near Ava's dresser, he spotted a smear of makeup, foundation mixed with a faint streak of blood. Beside it, a hair tie stretched out as if torn from someone's wrist. "Someone fought with her," he murmured. But the most important detail lay beneath Ava's fingernails. DNA. Skin cells. Something she had grabbed in her final terrified moments. Carefully, officers collected samples and sealed evidence bags. The coroner arrived shortly after. Harper stood in the doorway as they lifted Ava gently from the floor. Even in death, she looked heartbreakingly young, her curls brushing her cheek, her face peaceful in a way that contradicted everything around her. Harper exhaled slowly. "Who did this to you, Ava?" Outside the apartment, 2 neighbors whispered near the stairwell. "There was this older man around here a lot," one said quietly. "Fancy car. Expensive suits." "Yeah," the other agreed. "And that woman who always came with him. Never smiled." Harper looked up sharply. He didn't know their names yet. But he would soon. And when he did, nothing in the case would ever feel simple again. Detective Harper Lewis returned to the precinct with a folder full of early notes and a growing sense of unease. Everything about Ava Clarke's death felt deliberate. The forced gas, the burning candle, the subtle but clear signs of a struggle, this wasn't a panicked act. It was a staged scene meant to hide the truth. By the time the preliminary autopsy report came in, Harper's suspicion hardened into certainty. Ava didn't die from the gas leak. She had been attacked first. Blunt force trauma. Possible strangulation attempt. Defensive wounds consistent with grabbing or clawing at someone. And beneath her fingernails, skin cells belonging to a woman. Not a man. Not Richard Hale, the wealthy mentor neighbors had seen. But a woman connected to him. Harper leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. The neighbor descriptions replayed in his mind: a sleek black car, a sharply dressed woman who never smiled, and a man who looked far too comfortable in a building where hardly anyone knew each other's names. He wrote 2 names at the top of his notepad. Richard Hale, Claire Monroe. The circle of suspicion had just tightened. That evening, Harper and his partner, Detective Nina Walters, visited Ava's parents in Portland via video call. The grief on Mark and Ellen Clarke's faces was raw and unfiltered. Still, they were determined to help. When Harper asked about Richard Hale, Ellen's expression darkened. "Richard knew Ava since she was a teenager," she said slowly. "Back when he invested in our neighborhood redevelopment project." Harper nodded. He had already read about it. A messy business venture years ago, promised profits, vanished funds, and speculation that Richard had pulled out before the project collapsed, leaving several families financially hurt. "We lost a lot," Mark added gently. "But Ava, she never blamed him. She said people deserved second chances." Ellen shook her head. "He always took an unusual interest in her. Even when she was young. Too much interest." Mark squeezed her hand. "We don't know that he's involved." But Harper saw something flicker in Ellen's eyes, a certainty she didn't dare voice. The next morning, Harper and Nina drove to Richard Hale's Beverly Hills home. The property was immaculate, elegant, quiet. It looked more like a museum than a place someone lived. Richard greeted them with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Detectives," he said calmly. "I heard about Ava. A terrible loss." His tone was smooth, but his posture too controlled, as if he had practiced this moment. "Mr. Hale," Harper began, "we understand you were close to Ava." Richard's smile stiffened. "I was a mentor, nothing more. I believed in her talent." "And you visited her apartment recently?" "A handful of times. Strictly professional." Harper didn't mention the neighbor's comments. "Not yet." "And the woman often seen with you?" Nina asked. "We're told she was with you during several of those visits." Richard's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, tightened. "You must mean Claire Monroe. My assistant. She manages my schedule. She's always with me for meetings." Harper closed his notebook. "We'll need to speak with her." Richard hesitated just a fraction too long. "I'll give you her number." "Her address as well," Harper said, meeting his gaze. "We intend to speak with her in person." Silence stretched. Then Richard sighed. "Of course." Later that afternoon, detectives arrived at Claire Monroe's condo. The door opened only halfway. Claire looked composed, polite, but wary. Her movements were crisp, controlled, just like the woman neighbors had described. "Detectives," she said. "I've been expecting you." Richard called. Her voice was steady. Her posture perfectly straight. But her eyes, dark, focused, watched every movement the detectives made. Harper studied her. Tall. Fit. No visible injuries. No visible fear. But something was missing. Remorse. shock, sorrow. Instead, she radiated a calm that felt unnerving. "We need to ask you some questions about Ava Clarke," Nina said. Claire folded her hands. "Of course. But I'll tell you now, I didn't know her well." Harper raised an eyebrow. "You met with her several times." Claire blinked once. "Only because Richard asked me to coordinate logistics for her projects." "Did you visit her apartment?" "Only twice. Briefly." Her answer came too quickly. "And where were you last night?" Claire smiled thinly. "At home. Alone." Harper exchanged a glance with Nina. A self-made alibi. No witnesses. No verification. Claire seemed to sense their suspicion. Her voice hardened slightly. "If you think I harmed Ava, you're mistaken." Harper leaned in, lowering his voice. "Someone tried to destroy the evidence. Someone left the gas on. Someone lit a candle. And the DNA we found belongs to a woman." Claire raised her chin. "That doesn't mean it belongs to me." "No," Harper said softly. "But it means we're close." For the first time, Claire's expression flickered. Not fear. Not guilt. Annoyance. As if Ava's death was an inconvenience. Harper walked away from the door with Nina beside him. "She's hiding something," Nina whispered. "And she's not the only one," Harper said. Because there was someone else, they hadn't even looked at yet, whose connection to Ava, and to Richard, was far deeper than they realized. Someone whose jealousy would soon rewrite the direction of the entire investigation. Detective Harper Lewis spent the rest of the evening reviewing everything they had on Richard Hale and Claire Monroe. The evidence wasn't pointing to Richard, but it certainly wasn't clearing him either. And Claire? She was an ocean of calm in a storm she should have been shaken by. Too calm. But one detail bothered Harper more than anything else. Ava had fought. Her attacker had bled, just a little, but enough for Ava to claw DNA from beneath her nails. Enough for the lab to confirm the sample belonged to a woman. So far, the only woman with a clear tie to Richard was Claire. But she didn't flinch when Harper mentioned Ava's death. She didn't show fear. She didn't even make a mistake under pressure. People who kill in panic usually slip. Claire did not. That meant one of two things: either she was innocent, or she was far more dangerous than she looked. 2 days after the interview, the full forensic report arrived. DNA under Ava's fingernails, female. Hair found near the dresser, female. Fingerprint smudges on the inside of Ava's bedroom doorframe, also female. The part that stunned the entire team? None of it matched Claire Monroe. Not a single sample. Harper stared at the results, jaw tightening. Then who the hell was in Ava's apartment? Nina leaned over his shoulder. If it's not Claire, then we're missing someone important. Someone with motive, Harper added, and a personal connection to Ava. They returned to Ava's apartment building to re-interview neighbors, hoping someone remembered a detail they'd missed on the first pass. And that's when Mrs. Patel, the neighbor from 3B, hesitated before mentioning something new. "I didn't think it mattered," she said, wringing her hands. "But 2 days before Ava, before everything happened, I saw her arguing outside with a woman I didn't recognize. Not the older one you asked about. A different woman." "How old?" Harper asked. "Maybe early 30s. Dark hair. Expensive clothes." She looked upset, angry. She kept pointing at Ava's door. Harper's pulse quickened. "Did you hear what they said?" "No, but," she lowered her voice. "The woman said something like, 'You don't know what you're getting into.'" Nina wrote it down instantly. This was new. Important. A third person in Ava's life no one had mentioned. And then, Mrs. Patel added, "She left in a black sedan." Newer model. Dark windows. Harper and Nina exchanged a glance. Claire drove a silver sedan. Richard drove a black one, but he rarely let anyone else behind the wheel. Unless there was someone else in Richard Hale's orbit. Someone he spent time with privately, though he insisted nothing personal was going on. Someone his assistant handled scheduling for, someone who often accompanied him to business events, not as staff, but as company. Her name was Victoria Langford. A wealthy investor. Frequent donor. Business ally. Social companion. Richard had mentioned her exactly once in passing. So casually that it had seemed irrelevant, until now. Harper pulled up her photo on the police database, 34. Elegant. Unmarried. Involved in several of Richard's ventures, including a development fund that had ties to Ava's parents. She fits the neighbor's description, Nina said quietly. And she had motive, Harper replied. If she saw Ava as a threat to whatever she and Richard had going on, personal, professional, financial, anything. They drove straight to Victoria's Beverly Hills townhouse. The place was spotless, symmetrical, and sterile, like a hotel lobby without the warmth. Victoria answered the door wearing a tailored jacket and a practiced smile. Detectives. What an unexpected visit. Her voice was calm. Too calm. We'd like to ask you a few questions, Harper said. Of course, she replied smoothly. But I only have a moment. I have a meeting. Harper didn't move. We'll make it quick. Do you know Ava Clarke? Victoria blinked once, subtle, but noticeable. I've heard the name, she said. Through Richard. Did you ever meet her? No. Did you visit her apartment? A pause. A single second too long. Absolutely not, she said. Nina stepped in. Where were you the night Ava died? Victoria folded her arms, almost as if shielding herself from something unseen. At home, she said calmly. Alone. Harper tilted his head slightly. We have a witness who saw you arguing with Ava 2 days before her death. Victoria's eyes sharpened, flint turned to steel. That's impossible, she said, her voice tightening. Someone is mistaken. And we have DNA, Harper added softly, from the attacker. Victoria swallowed. The first crack in her perfect composure. I think it's time for you to leave, she said coldly. Harper didn't push further. Not yet. They needed the DNA report. They needed to confirm what their instincts already screamed. Back in the car, Nina exhaled sharply. She's hiding something. More than something, Harper said. The moment we mentioned the witness, she froze. And the DNA, if it's hers. Harper looked out the window at the quiet, expensive street. It changes everything. Because if Victoria Langford's DNA matched the samples from Ava's apartment. This wasn't about mentorship. Or business. Or bad timing. It was about jealousy. Money. Power. And a dangerous triangle no one had seen forming until it was too late. The forensic confirmation arrived just after sunrise on a Tuesday morning. Detective Harper Lewis had barely stepped into the precinct when the lab director, Dr. Elaine Brooks, approached him with a sealed envelope. Harper, she said quietly, you'll want to see this. Inside were the final DNA results from Ava Clarke's crime scene. There was no ambiguity. No partial matches. No degraded samples. The DNA beneath Ava's fingernails, the hair near her dresser, and the fingerprint smudges on her bedroom door all matched one person, Victoria Langford. Harper closed his eyes for a moment, not in relief, but in grim recognition. They had their suspect. And the motive was beginning to come into focus. Richard Hale's involvement? Nina asked as soon as she saw the report. Indirect, Harper replied. But Victoria acted on something tied to him. Before moving in, they needed to understand the relationship web, what exactly Victoria thought she was protecting. They started with Richard. Richard Hale didn't look surprised when detectives returned to his home. He invited them into his marble-tiled foyer with a tight smile that felt more like a mask. "You're back sooner than I expected," he said. Harper cut straight to the point. "We know Victoria Langford visited Ava. And we know she didn't take it well." A faint twitch ran through Richard's jaw. "Victoria has always been protective," he said carefully. "Protective of what?" Nina asked. "Your reputation? Your business? You?" Richard exhaled and stepped toward a large window, staring at the manicured lawn outside as if the green symmetry could provide clarity. "Victoria and I have worked together for years," he began. "She's invested in multiple projects. She's loyal, dedicated. And yes, she cares about me personally." "More than you care about her?" Harper pressed. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he turned slowly. "Victoria believed Ava was a distraction. She thought Ava was jeopardizing a negotiation involving her company and my development firm." Nina crossed her arms. "So Victoria confronted Ava to protect you?" Richard swallowed. "She thought Ava had influence over me. She thought Ava was replacing her." "And was she?" Harper asked bluntly. Richard hesitated. Then shook his head. "No. Ava was young, hopeful, talented. I encouraged her, but I never promised her anything beyond mentorship." Harper studied him. "Did Victoria know that?" Richard almost smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Victoria hears what she wants to hear." The timeline snapped into place. Victoria had known about Ava. She had seen Ava as a threat, to business, to reputation, to the hold she believed she had over Richard. But there was something more personal simmering beneath it, jealousy. Not the romantic kind, exactly. But the jealousy of losing power, losing influence, losing her position in Richard's circle. Victoria Langford built her identity around being indispensable. And Ava, young, talented, unpolished but promising, represented the one thing Victoria hated. A future that did not include her. Detectives prepared the arrest warrant. As they arrived at Victoria's townhouse, several unmarked cars lined the street. Officers approached the door cautiously, but Victoria answered before they could knock twice, as if she had been waiting. She still wore her impeccable jacket, hair perfectly styled. Not a crease out of place. "Detectives," she said calmly, even politely. "I assume you're here for me." Harper stepped forward. "Victoria Langford, you're under arrest for the murder of Ava Clarke." Victoria didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. As officers cuffed her wrists, she lifted her chin slightly, her voice quiet but steady. "You don't understand what she was doing," she said. Nina asked, "What do you mean?" "She was manipulating him," Victoria whispered. "Using him. And he couldn't see it. I had to protect him. Someone had to." Harper's voice hardened. "You protected no one. You took a life." Victoria's gaze shifted, cold, distant, but strangely serene. "Richard will understand." Harper stared at her. "No, he won't." Victoria allowed herself a small, bitter smile. "He already does." At the station, Victoria's calm shattered the moment she realized Richard wasn't coming to support her. She demanded to speak with him, insisted he would explain everything, insisted he'd tell them she only acted out of loyalty. Richard never came. Victoria's composure collapsed. Her voice shook. Her hands trembled against the metal table. "He told me she was a risk," she whispered. "He said she was reckless. He said Ava didn't understand real-world consequences." Harper leaned forward. Did he tell you to harm her? Victoria blinked rapidly. No. But he let me believe something needed to be done. Did he ask you to confront her? No. But he didn't stop you. Victoria's eyes filled with hollow realization. He knew, she said, voice cracking. He knew, and he let me walk into that apartment. Harper didn't soften. You're responsible for your actions. Not him. Victoria's shoulders shook, just once. He promised me I'd always have a place in his world, she whispered. But she threatened everything. Harper spoke gently this time. Ava Clarke was 23. She had no power over your life, unless you let fear convince you she did. Victoria lowered her head. It wasn't fear, she murmured. It was certainty. I thought if she disappeared, things would go back to normal. Then she looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. But nothing goes back after something like that. But the case didn't end with Victoria's confession. Because something didn't add up. Something Richard Hale wasn't saying. Something he had encouraged, indirectly but deliberately. Harper saw it clearly now. Victoria acted alone. But she hadn't acted without influence. And the deeper they dug, the more they realized. This wasn't just a case of jealousy. It was a case of power. A system of people protecting each other. A system that didn't just allow tragedy, it enabled it. And that system wasn't finished with them yet. Victoria Langford's arrest made headlines for weeks. A wealthy investor, accused of killing a young actress, was the kind of story Los Angeles devoured. Yet the trial that followed was strangely subdued. No dramatic testimony. No explosive revelations. Just evidence, quiet arguments, and the heavy weight of a life lost too soon. Prosecutors presented Victoria's DNA, her confrontation with Ava Clarke, and her own words, spoken during interrogation, about protecting Richard. They argued she had acted out of obsession, jealousy, and fear of losing the influence she clung to. The defense countered that her actions were impulsive, driven by emotional instability, and lacking true intent. They painted her as a woman who had overstepped her relationship with Richard, spiraled under pressure, and misinterpreted their connection. It didn't matter. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. And yet, when the verdict came, the courtroom gasped. Not guilty. The jury believed there was enough doubt, too many unanswered questions about motive, too much uncertainty about whether Victoria planned the attack or simply confronted Ava and lost control. It was a blow Ava's family never recovered from. Victoria walked out of court without a conviction. But she did not walk out whole. Her reputation evaporated overnight. Investors dropped her. Clients ghosted her. Her social circle, once polished and powerful, shrank to nothing. Even Richard Hale distanced himself, insisting he had no knowledge of her actions, and deeply mourned Ava's passing. But detectives knew the truth. The bond between Richard and Victoria was built on unsaid expectations. He never told her to act, but he never stopped her either. And that silence had been enough. In the years that followed, more stories surfaced about Richard's business practices. Allegations of fraud, intimidation, and financial abuse. Lawsuits. Whispered accusations. Investigations that started strong and fizzled out without explanation. Each time, he managed to slip through legal cracks, untouchable, insulated by money and connections. Victoria, meanwhile, tried to rebuild her life. But she could never outrun the shadow of Ava Clarke's death. Even acquitted, she carried the weight of what she'd done. There were rumors she moved to Arizona, then Nevada. Rumors she tried to start a consulting firm. Rumors she couldn't keep a single client. Nothing stuck. Whenever someone recognized her name, the conversation ended with a quiet judgment. She's the one connected to that actress. Victoria had escaped prison. But she hadn't escaped the truth. Ava's parents returned to Portland after the trial. They kept her photos on the mantel, her journals in a box, and her favorite scarf folded neatly in the hallway drawer. Every year on her birthday, Ellen placed a single sunflower, Ava's favorite, on the windowsill. They still called the investigating team every December, asking if anything new had surfaced. Harper always answered, even when the news was the same. "I'm still looking. I haven't forgotten her." Because he hadn't. He carried Ava's case file in his desk drawer for more than a decade. He reread her statements, her texts clipped into evidence sheets, her audition notes scribbled on the back of grocery receipts. He thought about her smile and the headshot pinned to the front page. In quiet moments, he wondered if justice was supposed to look like this, unfinished, unresolved, denied by technicalities but heavy in everyone's hearts. He knew the truth: Victoria Langford caused Ava's death. But Richard Hale? He had engineered the environment that allowed it. And the system had let both of them walk away. 10 years later, an investor scandal briefly dragged Richard's name back into the news: fraud, intimidation, manipulation. But once again, the charges were dismissed. Once again, nothing stuck. Once again, he disappeared behind polished statements and expensive legal teams. Victoria declined interviews. Claire Monroe moved abroad. And Ava Clarke remained a memory preserved in grief. Her family never stopped searching for answers. Detectives never closed the file. And the story, her story, became a quiet echo in the world of young performers who came to Los Angeles with dreams and left with caution. Ava's apartment building was renovated and repainted. New tenants moved in. Most didn't know what had happened. Life moved on, as it always does. But every now and then, someone mentioned the actress who made a desperate call that night. The neighbors who heard noises but didn't check. The woman whose DNA marked a struggle that justice never fully acknowledged. The powerful man who walked through the flames untouched. And somewhere in that quiet retelling, through whispers, old articles, and unanswered questions, Ava Clarke's voice lived on. Because even with no conviction, no confession, and no legal closure, one truth remained unshakable. Her life mattered, and her story refused to disappear.